Excellent. Well, thanks again for everything, Gary. And hello, everyone. As Gary mentioned, my name is Matthew Shell. I am Senior Business Development Manager here at CAPSA Management Simulations. And it's great to be partnering again with the great folks here at Training Magazine for another interesting session that we have for you today. And on that topic, we will be talking about scaling leadership development, how top companies find and fast track their future leaders, something that we have quite a unique experience with because we at Capsum have been creating simulation based training and assessment solutions for companies all around the world. And in fact, we've been doing it for 4 decades as of next year. And one trend that we're seeing now, and we've certainly seen grow over the last couple of years, is that top companies are really starting to double down on their leadership development efforts. And that's largely because companies are facing some pretty significant challenges. They're really turning to L&D to lead the charge in overcoming said challenges. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and get started. And the first thing I want to observe was the top 10 focus areas for L&D this year. Because today's L&D teams are faced with an endless list of critical responsibilities, as I'm sure you're all aware of. But specifically, what we'll be looking at is the 2024 LinkedIn Learning Report here, where we see everything from upskilling employees and creating a culture of learning to improving employee retention and engagement as top initiatives. But I think it's really worth noting that the number one focus area is aligning L&D efforts with business goals. So in other words, making sure our initiatives are driving business impact. So the stakes are pretty much higher than ever at this moment. And as a response, we're seeing many L&D leaders, such as yourselves, prioritizing what they know works best. And that is, of course, leadership development. But there is another interesting insight from this LinkedIn report that expands upon this point. They use the term mature career development initiatives. Essentially, a company has mature career development if their initiatives yield positive business results. And basically, I'm speaking to that business impact that I just alluded to. So about 40% of companies have mature career development, and of those companies, 70% of them use leadership development programs. It's by far their most commonly utilized initiative. And with business impact being the top focus, as we saw, leadership development is where L&D leaders are placing their bets because it's a tide that raises all ships. And really, it's easy to see why, because having effective leadership at your company helps you navigate rapid changes in the business landscape, while still at the same time fostering a culture of innovation and adaptability and strategic decision making. But also, effective leadership attracts and retains top talent. It's a signal of a commitment from your organization that you invest in employees' growth and development. And then finally, effective leadership also inspires and motivates teams, leading to higher levels of employee engagement and productivity. And with this need to do more with less these days, and if done right, leadership development can really move the needle on those focus areas that we just took a look at on the previous slide. So whether we're talking about ambitious growth goals or engaging or upskilling employees or keeping ahead of disruption, we are seeing companies wanting to build a bigger and faster leadership pipeline that produces these capable individuals that are ready to step into these critical roles. And that's really the essence of what we're going to be talking about today. We want to see how can we build a bigger and faster leadership pipeline. And to kick things off, I wanted to start by covering 3 general principles that are going to guide how we think about everything we're going to talk about today. Essentially, anything we say is going to be good or bad in relation to these 3 principles. And the first of those principles is going to be that people learn best by doing. And when we say best, we really mean taking learning to a higher order. So, for example, if you're a Bloom's taxonomy fan by chance, it's moving up that pyramid, being able to skillfully apply and build upon what you're learning about. And to give a more practical example, we could take a look at cooking. A cookbook can give you some great ideas for meals and techniques to cook them, but you really first need to learn to cook by experimenting and making things on your own. Because no matter how many episodes of Top Chef you may watch, if you don't have the chance to consistently practice what it is you're trying to improve, you'll struggle to meaningfully develop that area. And now, for many of you, I'm sure this comes across as a no brainer, but it is a significant challenge that we do see in the L&D world. In fact, to build on that, if we look at how much knowledge transfers to real world performance, we find that only 19% of knowledge acquired through training can be skillfully applied on the job. And while this is shocking, I think it perfectly illustrates that there is this bit of a knowing doing gap between training and application. But let's hold on to that thought for now, and we'll take a look at our second principle, which is, of course, you can't improve what you can't measure. Well, okay, technically you can, but if you focus on making progress towards something, then you want to be sure that you're measuring it. To give you another practical example, imagine, you need to drive somewhere, but you don't know where you're at and you don't have your GPS. So it can be really tough to know what exactly your next move should be. It's tough to make progress towards something if you don't have a good idea on where you're starting from and how you're progressing from that point forward. And just like a GPS, L&D is all about moving people from point A to point B as efficiently as possible. So that means we need to be measuring development. We need to understand where people's skills are at now and monitor their progress over time. And again, this probably seems pretty obvious, but it is another significant challenges that I hear when I talk to L&D teams. And I say that because only 16% of companies are evaluating behavioral change by assessing the transfer of learning into the workplace. So, long story short, there's things that we're managing, but we're not necessarily measuring. And that's a huge gap. But let's take a look at our third and final principle, which is that actionable feedback is the fuel for growth. If L&D is about changing behavior to improve performance, then feedback is what provides that awareness and that guidance to accelerate that change. And actionable feedback, even if it's small, can significantly influence desired behaviors. And that's simply because most people out there want to do a good job. Even if someone does poorly at something, oftentimes they don't know what they did wrong. Or if they do, they don't know why what they did was wrong, and they usually don't know what they need to do differently. So, actionable feedback presents us with a very significant opportunity to drive up that self-awareness and to point learners in a better direction for the future. And I'm speaking to all of you as L&D leaders. We've all given and received feedback, but there are a few areas that I find where L&D teams tend to struggle. And to highlight those, I've got three ingredients for actionable feedback that I'd like to describe to you. With the first one being is that feedback needs to be timely to ensure that the learning event they just went through is still fresh within the recipient's mind. I'm sure all of you have experienced, getting feedback within the past week or even the last day or so, but maybe you couldn't recall exactly what details that person was referring to, making the connection between the feedback and what they were actually referencing, right? And as a second component, feedback needs to be specific so the learner understands precisely what they're doing right or wrong. A simple good job or this needs improvement isn't going to cut it. And then the third ingredient I would say is that feedback has to be constructive. Of course, you want to balance positive and negative feedback, but especially when it's negative, you need to provide actionable steps for improvement because you don't just want to tell them to do something differently, you want them to do it correctly. So, in summary, while these three principles should seem intuitive and like no-brainers, the reality is that most L&D initiatives lack them and lead to training that doesn't exactly move that needle when it comes to that top focus being business impact. And to demonstrate this fully, I have a couple of pretty alarming stats for you here in that only 25% of executives say that training measurably improves business performance, followed by the fact that only 8% of CEOs say they see the business impact from their L&D programs. And honestly, this is the reality of why a lot of companies come to us at Capsum. They're looking to drive more impact and they want to measure it. So the question really becomes, where are we going wrong here? How do we course correct this? And what we find is that the specific challenges that companies struggle with can usually be boiled down to L&D teams simply just resorting to a few bad habits, if anything. And we'll cover all three of the habits you see on screen here today, and it could be a combination of all three of these, or maybe it's just focused on one. But what we're going to hit on is how some of the evaluations, some of the most common ones we use, are very prone to bias. And then we'll also talk about how the problem when we engage in learning that lacks any sort of real world relevancy, or when we use vanity metrics that don't exactly measure what matters most. And of course, we're going to dive into all three of these, but we're going to look at it specifically through the lens of leadership development. And just to start, there's really three overarching jobs to be done when it comes to building out your leadership pipeline. Number one, of course, you need to identify emerging and high potential employees. Two, you need to create targeted training initiatives that bridge critical skills gaps. And then three, you need to be able to monitor the development and provide that continuous feedback. And keeping this in mind, let's take a look at how these bad habits can impact our leadership development efforts. And we'll start with how evaluations are very much prone to bias. And let's just start off by taking a look at how we look at identifying high potential employees. Because a lot of the times I see companies typically over relying on biased evaluations that are easy to get, they're easy to implement, but they don't do a good job of capturing a person's true capabilities. I'm talking about evaluations like performance reviews or 360-degree surveys or even managerial recommendations. All of these can lead to evaluations that can be influenced by personal relationships, or perhaps even workplace politics, or they have inconsistencies in their quality when you try to use them at scale. Maybe they're too subjective as opposed to objective, for instance. So when we're thinking about building out a bigger leadership pipeline, this approach, of these evaluations can often lead to some significant problems. The first one being that we tend to look at high performing individual contributors as kind of shoe ins for future leaders. And this may be the case, but often the things that make a great individual contributor aren't necessarily the qualities that make a great leader. The potential to be a leader still needs to be validated. And then the second thing here to look at is, we often overlook those who might have high potential, but maybe they're less visible in the organization. Maybe they're not the first ones to raise their hand by chance when an opportunity arises. So if we want to build a bigger pipeline, we need to have a more comprehensive way to evaluate the potential across an entire organization. And then the final point I'll make is, going back to our second principle, that you can't improve what you can't measure. If we aren't getting a good benchmark of the competencies we want to improve, then we're going to have an uphill battle ahead of us. And to be blunt, those biased methods really lack the type of precision that we need. But moving on to and building on that, let's explore why we should aim to also avoid learning that lacks real world relevancy. And in this case, let's take a step back and just simply look at the goal of leadership development. It's all about performance. It's preparing folks for the next stage of their career, moving them again from point A to point B. So if we aren't connecting what we're learning to the real world, what they experience on a day-to-day basis, then we aren't going to close that gap, and we're not going to see that learning transfer to the job itself. And I would say that this is primarily due to an over-reliance on, your generic one-size-fits-all initiatives that don't align directly with the specific needs of your business. Or perhaps you're using passive, more knowledge-based experiences that don't really activate meaningful skill development. They're just more about memorization or knowledge retention, right? And going back to our first principle, the people learn best by doing, if we want to move someone from point A to point B, then we need to give them consistent opportunities to practice what they're learning in relevant scenarios that mirror that real world. And if you don't, well, then oftentimes learners become disengaged, or they lose interest, or they forget what they learn because they don't have a context to understand it within. And you may have even wasted resources because performance doesn't change, and then they need retraining anyway, ultimately. And to demonstrate this, I go back to that stat where we said, less than 20% of knowledge acquired can be skillfully applied on the job. Well, we can actually look beyond that, because it's not just a problem with knowledge, because we also find that only 12% of learners apply skills from their training to their job as well. And that's simply not going to be enough to produce the kind of business impact you're looking for with your L&D initiatives. And then finally, the last bad habit I wanted to focus on was talking about vanity metrics and how they don't measure what truly matters. And because if we want to make progress towards something, we need to measure what it is we're actually trying to improve. And those measures provide that bridge to that quality insight and feedback, going back to our third principle. And vanity metrics, when I speak to that, I'm talking about things like employee satisfaction or the number of courses completed. These can be somewhat helpful from a administrative view, but they don't exactly add much value in understanding the impact of L&D efforts. Many times they lead to a false sense of success. It could lead to complacency, and they actually don't let you see where further training may be necessary. And without deeper insights into how training is impacting performance, you could be leaving critical skills gaps unaddressed, leading to underdeveloped competencies across the organization. And then also focusing on the wrong metrics can lead, frankly, to an inefficient use of your L&D budget. And by prioritizing programs that, again, don't drive that needle on significant business impact. So, in fact, according to the exact same LinkedIn report that we started with, 50% of the metrics L&D uses for success can be classified as vanity metrics. And it's actually the top 5 ways L&D measures success if we look at the list of the top 12, which you can see a portion of there on the left side of the screen. Again, things like employee satisfaction, number of courses taken, may be some leading indicators for success. Don't get me wrong, but they are far away from giving you the data you need to effectively monitor progress and measure training impact. And just in this first 15 minutes or so, we've covered a lot of ground, different challenges, different habits, but of course, ultimately, what exactly is the solution here? Well, that's where we here at Capstone would like to share with you our unique approach to leadership development. And to do so, I'd like to make this as practical as possible. I'd like to share with you some of the exact challenges that our clients faced and how we worked hand in hand with some of the world's top companies to grow and accelerate their leadership pipeline, specifically with simulation based solutions. So basically, what I'd like to do for the remainder of the session is share 5 unique success stories from the following world renowned companies and professional organizations, each of which had a very unique leadership development challenge that they wanted to help us to help solve. Everything from building business acumen to scaling up succession planning, and of course, proving training ROI as well. But before we do dive into each of those, I thought that it would be a little helpful to give you a bit of context and to what types of solutions that we utilize to do so before we get to those success stories. And the first of 2 solutions that I'd like to introduce you to is what we call a leadership accelerator. And basically, what these are is they're group based, facilitator led leadership development programs that really aim at building business acumen, enhancing strategic thinking, demonstrating what cross functional decision making looks like, and of course, improving team dynamics as well, all critical components of leadership. It's been a tried and true method that we've used for nearly 4 decades at this point. And just to provide a brief summary of this experience, basically what we do is we break leaders into teams where they take on the role of executive leaders of a multi-million-dollar company where they're actively competing against their peers to try to be a market leader in the simulated marketplace. And the reason that many of our clients really like this, and the reason they do it, is because it's very practical, it's a very hands on experience that demonstrates firsthand the importance of strategic alignment, how all the different aspects of a business need to come together to successfully implement a strategy, while at the same time giving a holistic view of how any business operates. This is what people have come to us for, whether it's trying to train emerging leaders for the path that lies ahead of them, or just to simply try to refine the knowledge of executive leaders. And to expand on this a bit more, basically what we're doing is exposing learners to the different critical decisions that core business units have to make on a daily basis. Some of which you see here on screen, of course, but again, all within a safe, simulated environment. And what makes these programs work so well is that they break down siloed thinking. They show a learner what's important across an organization, not just within their given department. So that way, somebody in finance can see how production operates and vice versa, again, to break down those silos and give them that holistic view. But really, this is just a taste of the concepts we cover in these sort of leadership accelerators. And, going back to what we talked about earlier, is you need data to measure performance, which brings us to the fact that these experiences are very robust, they're very rich, And make no mistake, these are very much a serious game. Our clients want our simulations to mirror the real world data that their leaders rely on in order to drive their business forward. And they also really appreciate the expertise that we at Capstone can bring to the table because we bring facilitators who are constantly providing detailed debriefs on how to meet key performance objectives, how to conduct market analysis, and of course, how to understand the core financial statements, like a balance sheet, for instance. Again, all things any leader out there will need to know to be successful. And really, it's this process of decide, apply, and reflect where we're able to hit on all those best principles that we alluded to at the start of today's session. But at the same time, this is still only one of the two methods that we commonly use to assist companies with fast tracking their leaders. And as a quick introduction on that side, to introduce you to the second part of the equation, I'd like to introduce you to these fully customizable leadership skill assessments that we're going to allude to, that we refer to as inbox simulations. And as a quick synopsis, these are basically simulated workplace experiences where we take learners and put them into a fictional role at a fictional version of their company, where we can assess how well would they respond to the day-to-day tasks, issues, and maybe even crises that we know they're going to experience as leaders. And they're always interacting with different stakeholders, both internal and external, like they would in their daily role. And as the name suggests, inbox simulations, it's all done in a simulated email platform that we all use on a daily basis, making it much more authentic, much more intuitive. It makes it easier for learners and leaders to relate to it and apply what they've learned. And this approach directly addresses one of the key challenges we were discussing a bit earlier, the gap between bridging theoretical knowledge to practical application. Because by immersing learners in scenarios that reflect their daily roles and tasks, we can ensure that the training is relevant and practical. But what's really going on behind the scenes of these skill assessments is what our clients really appreciate, because these inbox sims allow us to empirically measure, not subjectively, but objectively measure the skills that matter most for any given role. Whether we're talking about soft skills like communication or problem solving, or technical or procedural knowledge, while at the same time giving those learners immediate qualitative feedback that identifies their core strengths and hones in on the areas most needed for improvement. But what I would say that our clients like most about these types of simulations is that they're fully customizable to their company. Whether we build it or whether their instructional designers build it, it's always crafted with the same science-backed approach and IO psychology principles that we've been perfecting for nearly 40 years now. But there is one final thing I want to mention here before we go on to the success stories. And that is that these experiences are both immersive and engaging, because the decisions that you make in an inbox simulation have these cascading, these branching effects that lead to very dynamic and very often different experiences from learner to learner. Because we're not just talking about binary right or wrong choices here, but rather nuanced responses with varying levels of effectiveness that can lead to those different outcomes. Because just like how I may respond to an email in the morning today can determine the subsequent interactions I have in the rest of my day, this is true in these simulations as well. You're able to see the consequences of your actions in real time, positive or negative. And it's with this quick introduction to both the Leadership Accelerator and these leadership skill assessments that I'd be happy to now jump into the success stories to show you how exactly they were applied. And we're going to go ahead and start with a story from Diageo and how they combine these two solutions to develop business acumen experientially for their general managers. And just as a brief introduction, Diageo is a British multinational alcoholic beverage company whose portfolio includes some of the most well-renowned beers and spirits out there, things like Guinness and Johnny Walker. And what Diageo was looking for was an experiential way to assess and develop the core business knowledge of general managers that were managing entire regions of their business. However, they did have some very unique challenges that they wanted to address. They wanted their GMs to understand the relationship between finance, marketing, commercial, and supply aspects and topics, but not just generally speaking. They wanted to be hyper focused on the experiences that their senior leaders had actually had in these areas. Therefore, we were brought in to help build these knowledge areas alongside subject matter experts, or SME for short, delivered leveling up sessions. And they wanted our solutions and our delivery to be as Diageo-fied as possible to maximize the relevance and engagement of these learners. So, what we did was we partnered on this kind of best of both worlds style approach, combining the group based leadership accelerator with a fully custom inbox simulation assessment that directly aligned with the SME concepts covered in those senior leader sessions that they went through. And the latter half is actually a little bit tricky because we and the Diageo SMEs were developing this content concurrently. But I would say that it was this collaborative approach, which was really the key to making this experience as relevant and authentic as possible. Because the way that we achieve this is really by working hand in hand with their subject matter experts to get that Diageo feel. Because we wanted to take their real world experiences and translate that into simulation based scenarios. And why is that? Well, because authenticity drives validity. So when we approach projects like this, we always start off with what are some jobs that need to be done? Who are the SMEs we're going to work with? What are their objectives? What are critical incidents that they have in each of these different domains we're looking to assess? And when I say critical incidents, I'm referring to the good, not so good, and great ways to handle a given scenario. But what was the challenge that they were facing? What was the action that they took? How effectively was the scenario or situation resolved, and what were the consequences of that decision? And once we gather all of these incidents, we quickly create the content, the scenarios, the responses, and scoring. And then right after that, we get a final review by the SMEs. And with that, we were able to create a brand new 60-minute custom simulation, which was implemented the first time last October. And again, it was this full collaboration with over a dozen subject matter experts, which led to a highly Diageo-fied experience. And as a result, what we did was delivered an immersive 2-day simulation competition that was highly relevant and engaging to develop the business acumen areas, alongside the development of an entirely custom sim-based assessment that we were able to build in less than 3 months' time to expose these general managers to the very scenarios that those Diageo leaders had faced, while also providing Diageo with group based and individualized performance data that helps to support the program's efficacy and is helping us now improve it even further into the future as we plan this October's event. And while this case does specifically focus on building business acumen, let's take a step away from Diageo and take a deeper look now at our next case, where we're going to be talking about how we partnered with Cummins to create a simulation based succession planning program series that was implemented on a global scale. Now, for this case with Cummins, Cummins, of course, a multinational engine and generator manufacturer based here in the United States, they wanted us to create a series of leadership development programs with a focus on succession planning from mid level leaders all the way up to executive leadership. But at the same time, they already had a lot of the pieces already there for an excellent learning pathway. But what they really wanted to add was this scalable and experiential way of exposing leaders to strategy in a very hands-on way. And at the same time, we wanted to make sure that this experiential component would be, have some continuity between mid-level programs and senior level programs. And of course, the final part is that as a global company that Cummins is, our involvement would have to include both on-site and virtual deliveries to a global audience multiple times a year. So the way that we collaborated was actually quite simple. First, Cummins would select senior managers and directors that were nominated by their supervisors to take part in a global leadership development program, or a GLDP for short, where they would then go through a multi-month program consisting of different workshops, different projects, and job rotations to kind of build their cross-functional understanding of Cummins' very vast business. And this all culminated with a 2.5-day strategy session with our leadership accelerator being the key component, but also getting some direct guidance on strategy from Cummins senior leaders. And to maximize the relevance here, what we did was we worked with Cummins to create a custom simulation scenario that reflects their traditional diesel engine business with newer divisions that are devoted to zero emission technologies. And as learners progress, through this GLDP, they continue their careers and they eventually assume the roles of executive and VP level roles. Well, then they're selected to take part in an executive development program, which follows a similar flow, but with a much more complex, a much more nuanced simulation that can really match the knowledge and expertise of these senior leaders. And the key insight that I want to highlight here is really the importance of alignment. Because with any leadership development program, you really have to make sure that you nail it before you try to scale it. And in Cummins' case, we needed to align our leadership accelerator with their company objectives, which of course was to develop these future leaders by mirroring their industry and aligning with their key performance indicators. But not to mention, we need to make sure that our virtual deliveries, when we're doing this globally, was just as strong as our on-site delivery. But beyond that, we also had to align it with their L&D strategy, in that our involvement in our simulations had to match the learner audience and provide some continuity between the experiences of future leaders all the way up to executive leader training, hence the difference in simulation difficulty. And it was this combination of these elements that led to a successful program capstone that we've been delivering for the better part of a decade and a half at this point. So as a result, we were able to create a very scalable, immersive training program that could be delivered anywhere at any time that would still make training impactful and hands-on regardless of the learner's location. And at the same time, we also modified the simulation scenario and starting conditions to really maximize the relevance by closely mirroring Cummins' industry. And finally, we provided different simulations with varying levels of complexity to meet the needs of different learner levels, thus providing this really great stepping stone style training program for those mid to executive level leaders. And while this is an excellent example of the kind of flexibility of our leadership accelerator, let's go ahead and take a look at the other side of that coin by looking at our third case that I'd like to share with you all on how the American Association for Physician Leadership collaborated with us to create a series of custom simulation based assessments to objectively measure leadership skills. But in this case, we're not just talking about any leadership skills, but we're talking about skills that are directly aligned with AAPL's competency models that really cover the topics that are most important to leaders in the healthcare industry. And as both a quick introduction and as their name suggests, the American Association for Physician Leadership is really the premier organization out there for both physician and providers going all the way back to 1975, with really their core focus being on providing leadership education, management training, and career development for well over 11,000 members in nearly 50 different countries. So it goes without saying that when AAPL reached out to us, that they already had a very expansive and a really highly effective training portfolio that had been well established for half a century. However, they did come to us with another unique challenge. They already had an initial assessment and certification process that would help identify subsequent trainings that would benefit their members, but they wanted to make it more immersive, more engaging, hence a simulation, to be able to motivate and encourage their members to pursue even more training, and at the same time, be able to provide them with some objective measurements that could be directly integrated into AAPL's homegrown LMS system. So, what did we do? Well, what we did was we created a custom by Capsum series of these 15-minute inbox simulations that directly align with their leadership technical skills framework, which consisted of these four domains: operation and policy, quality and risk, finance, and strategy innovation, which covered 16 different sub-competencies. So to do so, we set these micro simulations in a fictionalized healthcare institution and kept the experience concise enough that way they could go through all four of these in less than an hour's time. And upon completing these experiences, we were able to provide AAPL members with this instantaneous comparative feedback on all of these different aligned competencies and domains. And just like Diageo, it was really the subject matter experts, the SMEs, that were critical to our success here. And I'd be happy to share with you a little bit more about what does that process really look like to create one of these. Because, how exactly do you go about creating four different custom experiences, ensure perfect alignment and relevancy, and do all of this within 3 months' time? Well, you have to be confident in your process. You have to incorporate the expertise of IO psychologists and instructional designers. And you have to work with strong SMEs and frameworks, which AAPL had, because this process drives efficiency, which I would say would be one of Capsum's strong suits. And this allows us to determine not just the scope of the project quickly, but help us identify and work with the SME panel, create all the simulation content, and test and release the simulation quickly and efficiently. However, again, to be as efficient as possible, you need more than just the right process and the right people, but you also need the right platform to help you expedite that development. And that's exactly what we had because we've developed this web based no code authoring platform that allows both us and our clients who have instructional designers to create their own custom inbox experiences in no time at all. And this includes me customizing everything from the skills and competencies you want to assess to the roles of the learner that the learner takes on in the experience. And of course, the scenarios themselves, which again are most often based on real world experiences. In fact, for any of you interested, stay tuned towards the end. We'd be happy to give you full access to this platform, short of publishing, to explore it yourself as well. So stay tuned there. But let's go ahead and circle back to AAPL to look at some of the outcomes of their project because we were able to quickly adapt their existing yet somewhat static content into these highly relevant scenarios that directly aligned with their competency framework. And by providing this comparative percentile data on learner performance, they're now able to pinpoint skill gaps and accelerate their members' development by focusing on the areas most needed for development. And finally, this was all done with integration with their familiar LMS system in mind, allowing APL to really gather some deep insights to help learners prioritize future trainings, again, to have the most impact. And speaking of impact, this is actually a great segue to the fourth success story I'd like to share with you, where we'll go ahead and explore what Microsoft did and how they were able to prove their training impact by implementing these inbox simulations in a pre-test, post-test format alongside one of those leadership accelerator programs. And of course, Microsoft, a company that needs no introduction, they know firsthand the benefits of experiential learning, but they did have a very specific challenge for us. They wanted to empirically measure skill development at the beginning and the end of a brand new Journey to Principal training community that was comprised of some of their most highest ranking engineers, the top 1% to be exact. And they wanted to see if they were ready to take the next step in their career to be people managers. But there was one little bit of a curveball they threw at us here. They wanted to conduct this training entirely virtually, and the participants were scattered across 14 different countries and on 3 different continents. But the nice thing with working with us is that with this leadership accelerator and our inbox sims, it was as easy as a 1, 2, 3 step process. As they were able to utilize some of our ready to use solutions of inbox sims that looked at general business management competencies and people management competencies, and it allowed them to assess a multitude of core leadership skills on everything like their organization capabilities, problem solving, and of course, leading. And the way it worked is the first simulation or the pre-test was completed individually right at the beginning of their training community to kind of benchmark their skills against our global data set. And then they engaged in this multi-month virtual leadership accelerator where we were building up their strategic acumen. And then at the end of the program, we had the participants go through another inbox simulation that measured the same skills as the pretest, but this time from a supervisory perspective. And in each case, they were again provided with some individualized and instantaneous feedback. But what exactly did that look like? Well, here's just a quick sample of the report and some of the primary areas of feedback we provide. So we look at overall performance by percentile. How do their skills stack up against tens of thousands of others that have gone through these simulations? But at the same time, provide a developmental index. How effective did they respond to these scenarios? And how consistent were they throughout the simulation? And then by simply having them do a quick self-reported, self-assessment to rate their skill proficiencies against their peers, we're able to compare those perceived skill levels with the percentile data of the simulation to give them a self-awareness level gauge to see if they're over or underestimating their abilities, and most importantly, to visualize the skills gaps so we can highlight individual key strengths and weaknesses. That way they can improve on those areas in the future. So, with this pre and post test application, Microsoft was able to get empirical, longitudinal developmental data on their participants over the course of the program, all the way up to the group level. And for even a company like Microsoft, this was entirely new to them. But I'll let our program lead and team manager, Jim Chismar, say it best in that it was really the ultimate validation of their training efforts to be able to say, here's where we were and here's where we are now. And he goes on to say that most training at Microsoft is technical, where it's easy to see the change. But with Capsum Inbox, you can see the results even if they're not technical and right in your face. So to put a close on Microsoft here, we were able to quantify learner development over the course of this program, and we're going to be able to track these individuals' development well on and into the future as they go through Inbox again. And I'm actually very happy to say that many of the participants in this program were indeed selected to make that step up to a people manager to continue their career. And it was simply done by pinpointing their proficiencies at the start and then later on a post test. And Microsoft's going to be able to use that data we provided to continually iterate on the program to make it even better going on into the future. And again, we're happy to share the exact experiences that Microsoft went through with you as well if you want to see them firsthand. But as we move towards the end of the session, I did want to focus on one last success story with you all, and that is how we partnered with Lilly, the world's largest pharmaceutical company, to enhance organizational alignment. And to be brief here, Lilly is perhaps one of the best examples of how closely we work with our clients. They tasked us with enhancing strategic alignment for, being able to build up the cross-functional understanding of many of their manufacturing and quality leaders in relation to other key business units. And they had wanted to see how it all came together to form a successful strategy. And secondly, they wanted to make sure that we also built up their business acumen and financial literacy while making direct connections to Lilly's operations. So what we did here is we really took our partnerships to the next level. We took a more integrated approach where we actually co-deliver these leadership development programs, where both a Capsum and a Lilly facilitator drive home simulation concepts and how they directly relate to Lilly. And we even went as far as to integrate new decisions into our leadership accelerator, like a total quality management module that mirrors several of the key variables that Lilly measures on their manufacturing scorecard. And we also conducted some detailed financial statement analysis in the sim that we were able to directly compare to Lilly's most recent quarterly results at the time. So in summary on this, basically we crafted this highly effective feedback loop where their facilitators speak to key concepts from a Lilly perspective, followed by Capsum mirroring those concepts in the simulation module. And then once the simulation module is completed, the Lilly facilitator kicks off a debrief by describing the real world impacts of those type of decisions on their operations, followed by us coming in with a debrief on the simulation results themselves, thus creating this very cyclical process of tying simulation concepts directly to Lilly's business. So again, in terms of actions and outcomes, we were able to embed additional simulation concepts and modules that directly compare to Lilly's operations, while engaging in these collaborative debriefs that really enhance the transfer of learning and helped break down siloed thinking with an experience that provided a holistic view of how running such a company as large as Lilly really works. And with that, this does bring us to the conclusion of the Lilly case and our 5 case studies, which moves us towards the end of today's session. And I did just want to take a quick moment to summarize some of the key points we've been hitting on, starting with the fact that alignment and relevance are really the key drivers of impactful leadership development. But also to share a little bit from our perspective, we at Capsum understand that we are one piece of a larger puzzle. Because in order to be a good fit, in order to help our clients effectively, we need to be able to align with their learning and programmatic objectives. We need to seamlessly integrate into larger programs that have already been tried and true tested. We need to ensure that our experience is as relevant as possible. And we need to make sure we're providing them empirical data that demonstrate the outcomes of those L&D initiatives. In short, you need to make sure that a solution provider works in perfect harmony with your process, not some sort of one-size-fits-all solution. And again, from our perspective, it's our belief that practical, experiential, sim-based learning is the key to addressing these points. And to demonstrate that, we'd of course like to let you try these solutions firsthand. So if you do want to learn more about like this leadership accelerator program model or our skills assessment platform or both, we'd like to offer all of you the chance to experience them firsthand with what we're calling the Capsum Launchpad. It's entirely risk-free, and it just requires a 30-minute discovery call between you and I to make sure that we're a good partner for you and we can scope out your needs. And it's really just a quick 1, 2, 3-step process where the first thing you'll do is simply scan a QR code that'll be on the next slide here when we're in a Q&A session. And then or you can respond to the email we'll send out a little bit later. You can schedule a call with me. We'll discuss your needs, and I'll ask you just a few questions. And then within 2 weeks of our meeting, I'll personally provide you with a custom sim pilot setup. So that way you and your colleagues can review the simulations internally, just as the clients that we talked to did. And then from there, we just ask for your feedback and a quick debrief call. Get your thoughts. And if you want to move forward, or if you want to take this to the next stage, then we can discuss how we can scale up this pilot that can be immediately implemented with your leaders in no time at all. Really, what our goal here is we just want to share with you all of the benefits that we at Capsum and our clients have seen with these simulation based learning solutions. So, in closing, if you'd like to take part in this offer, feel free to simply scan that QR code on the bottom left of the screen to schedule a call with me personally, or again, respond to our email. I'd love to connect with any and all of you via LinkedIn as well if you want to look at the QR code on the right side of the screen. Of course, both Training Magazine and us will provide the slides to you from today's session via email. But in closing, I would like to thank you all for your time today and personally thank again Gary and Training Magazine for having us for today's session. And at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Gary, back to you.
So, Matt, I'm just going to make a small change here on the screen. We want to thank Capsum though for sponsoring today's webinar and bringing Matt to us and wonderful information here about that. And I'd like to invite everybody to go ahead and complete the little right here. That I'm moving around. A little question about what are your best takeaways from what you learned from Matt today, and also there's a poll in the upper right-hand corner there that we'd love to get your input on. What did you think about today's session? If you could go ahead and do that. So, Matt, I've got a change in slides here. I'm just going to put up as well,
Mhm.
and it should be there or there. Oops. And my apologies here. Anyway, while everybody uh, poll. I'll
Gary,
just
real quick, I think it looks like the poll is closed on this side. At least that's what I'm seeing.
oh, yeah, sure enough. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, Matt, could you bring your sharing back up? Yeah, there you go. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
So there's that QR code again, everybody. More than happy to talk with you all if you'd like. And then, yeah, happy to answer any questions in the remaining 10 minutes or so we have here.
There we go. Thank you, Matt. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. We do have some questions from folks. So I'll start with Leo's question here. He wanted to know well, what he says is, thank you for being here today. I wanted to ask you, how are organizations collaborating with people who have living experiences into their therapeutic wellness learning and development needs? Is that anything that Capsum is involved with?
Uh, I would say not necessarily. I would say our primary areas of focus that we do with these programs would be, again, kind of like around building the business acumen aspect of individuals, that strategic thinking, cross functional decision making, and team dynamics. Not to say that we don't cover those concepts to a smaller extent, but it's kind of like our primary focus versus like secondary focuses. So,
Okay, good. And Stacy, earlier on in the webinar, said, I'd like our employees to complete this type of training with people outside of our organization. Do you ever offer that type of experience so people can learn from others at other organizations?
yes, we have. Yes, we have. We've done some collaborative programs with our clients that, yeah, it's open to absolutely anybody. And that's where it's really unique because, obviously, when you're in an organization, you kind of are familiar with the way things are done. But bringing in teams that represent different companies, that's where they really exciting things happen because everybody has a different approach. You're exposed to different perspective, different ways of thinking, different decision making methods, right? So I would say there's absolutely value in that.
Great. Well, Stacy, thanks very much for that question. A couple of more questions here. People, how long is a leadership accelerator? Can it be done in a day?
So the group-based programs, absolutely. Yeah, I would say that we can be very efficient in that regard. Most of these programs only take about 6 to 8 hours on average. We can certainly do it within a day, and again, on site or virtual. So we can definitely do that.
Okay. And can our own trainers deliver these simulations?
That's actually an excellent point. Yeah, not something we highlighted too much in the webinar here, but yes, we can. We do provide train the trainer services, whether you're looking to deliver those leadership accelerators in a group-based format, or if you wanted to develop your own inbox simulations, we provide training on that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's good information. How can we customize scenarios?
So that would be more, I would assume that's more in reference to the leadership accelerators as well. So The nice thing is we can customize these to represent, different macroeconomic conditions or different industry conditions, like changing market segment growth rates or changing the economic environment, or say doing some interesting things like throw in a recession. How do participants navigate that, for instance? There's actually quite a bit we can do there. And we can also, as I alluded to with Cummins, we can, and Lilly as well, we can integrate new decisions that are really pertinent to your business or industry into these simulations as well. So there's a couple of things we can do.
Okay. Michael wanted to know if you could talk about multiple languages, if that applies.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Most of our simulations are very easily translatable. We've done these in a variety of languages, of course. Spanish, French, Portuguese, Mandarin. Few examples there and everything. But yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And Samar asked, what are your recommendations for how companies can internally create inbox simulation exercises?
Uh,
A popular topic. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, in that regard, we are more than happy to share. Very commonly, do I share our best practices on how these things are built? Because when we work with individuals that are creating their own sims, we want to make sure that it's just as successful as what we've seen on our side. So, not just best practices, but helping determine scope and making sure that they're assessing things the right way, helping out with scoring methodologies, helping out with, how dynamic of an experience do you want to create? We help with all of that. So, we can certainly do that.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, about the process, and what the participants experience? What do they receive in their inbox, and how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the author side, to be brief, I would say a lot of times it's just coming down to figuring out what kind of scope there is, and then working with a subject matter expert, or if you have an instructional design background, to craft the content, doing just some initial testing, and then you can release it. As far as the participant experience goes, everything is web based. They log in, they go through a brief onboarding process that introduces them to what they can expect in the simulation, as well as that self assessment that I alluded to that they complete. Then they go into the simulation itself. To give you an example from our ready to use sims, about 20 to 30 scenarios do they go through. And then we're assessing about 4 to 5 skills or competencies in a version. And then immediately, once they complete it, or you can set access for a later date and time, they get that feedback report. And one thing that I can expand upon there is that in addition to that feedback report, there's an optional individual development plan builder. So that way, if they did want to create an action plan that shows how they plan on improving these skills, whether with CAPSM resources or existing resources, they can do that. And then that brings us to like the Microsoft case study where they can do a post test. That way we can actually see how effective was that IDP, how effective was that action plan. So that's a quick synopsis, both author and participant side.
Great, that's fantastic information. So, let's see. I think Michael had another question. Curious to hear about applications developing leadership skills in kinesthetic environments.
A kinesthetic environment. So I would kind of take that as more like your frontline sort of managers, things of that nature. So the thing that I would say that makes our simulations very applicable to that is particularly on the inbox side is again it's a very familiar kind of delivery modality, being an inbox and everything, where even if they don't use it in their day to day, you can still present them the scenarios that they do see in those sort of environments. Just being in something that's more of a relatable platform. For instance, we've done this with like operations managers that rarely ever use email. They're out in the field, for instance, right? But we could still make it relatable because the scenarios themselves are based on what they're actually seeing, if that makes sense.
Okay, I think it does. Let's see. Somebody earlier, I can't remember who, wanted to know how long does it take to create a custom simulation?
So on that side, it really just comes down to all about the scope. I mean, we talked about AAPL's versions. I mean, those are 15-minute experiences. We created those in just a few days' time. Working with their subject matter experts, kind of a back and forth process. I mean, the actual authoring side, probably just a couple of hours, to be honest with you. But if you're talking about more of a larger scope, like say a 60-minute experience, then it just comes down to how dynamic it is. But I would say compared to other instructional design tools that might offer, the creation of simulations, I would say that we're going to be one of the most expeditious tools that they can use.
Okay. Well, we've got about 3 more minutes here, and I've got 2 questions, so I think it's gonna fit nicely, except if this maybe this next one is more involved. What does LMS integration look like for this?
So very common request we get, LMS integration on our side. We want to be able to give you all this data in real time. So if you're working with like a Docebo or a Cornerstone, for instance, we can easily implement it, be implemented in those systems, not just to deliver data, but help with things like a single sign-on style environment, things like that. Usually, it's just a conversation between our two IT teams. We utilize things like SCORM integration or XAPI to give you a couple examples there. Candidly, not my particular area of expertise, but usually it's fairly straightforward. I mean, to put it this way, again, going back to the AAPL example, we were able to integrate their system within about a week or two. It was really, and that was a homegrown system that was not any major, LMS system out there, but pretty easy for integration there. That way, you can take the data and kind of slice and dice it, if you will, the way that you want to. So.
Okay. One more. Christine wants to know how do you score simulations? Any simple answers to that?
Yeah, I could give a very 30,000 foot level answer to that. There's different methodologies we use, of course, but really what it relies down to is, again, you don't want it to be a binary true or false. You want it to be different layers, different levels of effectiveness, right? Where one is clearly the most effective choice, and then maybe there's a couple answers that go down to something that's less effective. A lot of times our scoring is based on that. So I guess the simplest way is think of like a good, better, best style scoring that we use, but we've used other, like I said, other modalities as well.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all the time we have, and those are all the questions we have. So it works
Excellent.
out nicely, and very nice job, Matt. We appreciate it, and we're very happy to have had Capsum here to walk us through this and show us. Well, I am sorry, I have some technical issues here, but to walk us through there and help us understand more about how simulations can be valuable to us. And I hope you'll come back. We have some previous webinars with Capsum also. When you go look at the recording, folks, you might search for Matt, and you can see what else he's talked about on this topic. Any final things you want to mention there, Matt, before we log out?
No, just I really appreciate everybody's time, and thank you for coming. And I look forward to speaking with some of you.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming and for participating too. Great questions. We look forward to seeing you the next time. Matt, I'll see you soon.
Take it easy, everybody. Have a good one,
Take
Gary.
care. All right.